Hey everyone, how's it going? Bowser the Healer here, and we're going to be talking about Echo versus Mandatory in the grand finals of the MDI Season 1 of Dragonflight. And no, that thumbnail was not clickbait. We're going to be going through all 4 games in the key moments leading up to that game number 4, where it's impressive how close it was for 2 perfect runs. Mild disclaimer, I've been losing my voice, so if I sound a little more raspy or growly, I apologize in advance. Game number 1 was Azure Vaults, and the Azure Vaults started off basically identical. Both teams were relatively on pace, and everything sort of changed after the first boss went down. There's that crystalline pack. Echo decided to just do it the normal way, do that pull, and then continue their run towards Azure Blade. Mandatory, on the other hand, decided to take that pack, bring it down to the bottom ring, do a bigger pull than Echo, and then go to the boss and continue grabbing trash and doing Azure Blade the normal way. Echo goes down and continues to pull onto Grey Wing, and then also afterwards going to the final boss, and then warping back to do Frog Pull, whereas Mandatory went and did Frog Pull, Grey Wing, and then the final boss. Echo's route looks to be faster, although they made a few mistakes that cost them a little bit of time. I'm not sure the time would have been the problem. The bigger problem was that Echo ended up getting their trash count wrong. So they ended up being unable to finish the dungeon, and Mandatory was able to clean it out. Honestly, I think the difference is that using Lust on a big trash pull generally is better for your time management than on a boss, and I think that's what would have made Echo win, but if you can't count, unfortunately, you lose a match. On to game number 2. Game number 2 was on Temple of the Jade Serpent, and it starts off, again, rough for Echo. They come out of the gate swinging, 2 go down right before the first boss. They ended up having a 20-25% difference on Wise Mari. That caused them to be a little bit behind, but Mandatory blunders. When they go into the rafters towards the second boss, they go to kill the book so that they can start the RP. The problem was that I don't think they killed the book, and that's actually what one of the commentators mentions in the boss fight. So then they have to kill the book later. They jump onto the boss, and Echo jumps onto the boss, and then Echo ends up taking the slightest of leads at one point, but it ends out roughly even as they move into the courtyard. The courtyard pull, unfortunately, is where things go south for Mandatory. While everything's looking good, I wasn't able to really tell from the footage. It almost looks like part of the team left the Lifebind totem. I think the Lifelink totem, that's what it's called. And it ends up killing their tank. They're able to miraculously recover, and I would argue Mandatory's ability to recover that and keep going is fantastic. But the amount of time that Echo got on them was huge. I mean, just look at the difference between the boss HPs. There's even a point where they're still on Flameheart and Echo is already into the final boss. So great work to Echo. Mandatory blundered. On to game number 3. Halls of Valor you probably heard about if you watched my top 5 video. However, it's important to note that this match was neck and neck the whole time. The biggest difference being that Mode ran out of mana, and I think that might have cost them some damage, but then Echo ends up losing a player and instantly getting battle res in the hallway, which allows Mandatory to take a small lead. But when all is said and done, after Fenrir 2, Mandatory's the one with the lead as they go to do the bear and the yak pull. Now, Echo goes to do it too, but if you paid attention, you might have noticed that a few people ran off to the DPS and one of the healers. They're able to run forward and grab the beers at a very specific time, a time that lets them bring them up to the 4 kings and prepare the 4 kings pull before the tank gets there and without the beers timing out, but also to stay out of combat. The druid and the tank bring all of the mobs up to the top of the light stair escalator ramp thing, mass root all the mobs, run into the 4 kings. The pull starts, everything goes smoothly, then the entire forest shows up, they pop Bloodlust, and it is perfectly clean. If you want to see some of the best mob management and cooldown management and tanking I've ever seen in World of Warcraft, it's probably Noah right there on Paladin doing this pull. Absolutely insane stuff, and it nets them the map. Perfect execution, great recovery from the small mistake. We're on to game number 4. Our final match, Shadowmoon Burial Grounds. And it's important to note that this is where the compositions are very different. We have a Paladin and a Preservation Evoker on the side of Echo, and we're rocking a Warrior and a Discipline Priest on the side of Mandatory. So the difference really becomes, does Preservation Evoker do enough damage to make up the difference of a PI combo with a Fire Mage? Well, It really depends on the dungeon, and typically speaking, yeah, I think PI Fire Mage does do more. But this is Shadowmoon Burial Grounds, one of the faster dungeons, and not with the craziest pulls. This dungeon isn't known for its gigantic pulls and its massive trash packs, and you kind of go boss to boss to boss very quickly. Echo does make it to the boss first. They pop Lust and everything before Mandatory does, but Mandatory catches up in the first boss fight, only being behind by a couple seconds. By the second boss, Mandatory ends up getting the lead because of that PI combustion combo. But then it turns out that Preservation Evoker, kinda nice with it, and the damage allows Echo to catch all the way back up. And while the bosses get pulled at roughly the same time, and Echo ends up with the lead with about, I wanna say like 7 to 10 seconds of time going into Blueberry first before Mandatory. On to the final boss, where the only real difference you'll see here is that Echo pops her combustion early while Mandatory opts to hold it. And while maybe that could have been a difference maker here, it wasn't quite enough, as Echo gets to pop Lust first and ends up helping them win the fight entirely. So you have to ask yourself, well, if the PI combustion combo wasn't able to come out any faster, if only Mandatory could have hit Lust sooner. Okay, well, could they have gotten there any faster? And when you look at the start of the match, you'll realize very quickly that it's not that Mandatory was slow, but that Echo was much, much faster. You see, after they both drop down below through the hole, the biggest time save here is that Zalia hits Zephyr, allowing everyone to move quite a bit quicker. And then on top of that, Zalia then rescues the DK to the top of the staircase, standing in this position to have line of sight of both targets. That means that the Death Knight gets pulled to the front and they can all run in. The Fire Mage from Echo pops Lust before everyone's really around the corner, and then they just go right to town on the boss. This seems to be the biggest difference maker. It wasn't damage profiles, it wasn't routing, it was specifically the speed in which Echo was able to get to the boss and get that Lust on cooldown, got them the win, and took home the championship, which I think is kind of incredible, all things considered. Mandatory was a phenomenal opponent, and their level of play was amazing. I mean, the fact that both these teams had near perfect runs, I mean, I think they're perfect as far as I can tell. The Evoker damage, the DN rages from the Evoker, yeah, you know what? Maybe that had a huge impact here, but the reality of the situation is when you look for a large piece of time save, the largest one is that Zephyr and that rescue. Crazy how fast that Echo got to the boss fight, and that's a big GG's from me. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the breakdown. I love the MDI. I love watching this. I love talking about it. And hopefully one day I can commentate one of these tournaments. It's sort of a dream of mine. I'm going to have more analysis and videos coming out soon as we also prepare for season 2 of Dragonflight. So make sure you get subscribed if you want to watch more of that, and I will see you all soon.